Texas' 7th District for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you so much, Chairman Latta. Thanks for holding this hearing. This is a really important hearing. It's been very useful and helpful, I think, for all of us here. Certainly, I've appreciated the testimony of all of the witnesses and appreciate you taking your time and sharing such detailed recommendations and thoughts in your written testimony as well. I want to follow up on a couple of things that we've heard today or things that were in your testimony. And Dr. Franks, I want to start with you. Your testimony, I'd say suggests, but I think your testimony just says that the courts have basically just gotten it wrong. And now we've got 30 years of the courts getting it wrong consistently, and that has become now precedent, and that is what's being followed. And so I really appreciate the specificity of your recommendations at the conclusion of your written testimony about specific changes to the provisions to potentially address the existing issues that we see. I guess it seems to me like part of the issue is that the very plain language of Section 230 in the first place, the courts have gotten wrong. So what do you suggest, or can you share with us other things you think we can or should do to avoid that problem in whatever we try to craft to address the situation now?
Thank you. And I think the most important aspect is to really focus on C1, because that seems to be where the problems are coming from, and to largely leave C2 where it is. And I think in terms of the problems that we've seen over and over again from the courts in C1 is I think there's two major issues. One is that even though protections under C1 and Section 230 generally are often touted as free speech issues, they're often touted as protections for free speech that are necessary to foster dialogue and encourage public discourse, the terms in C1 say information. And I think companies have really taken advantage of that ambiguity to really invoke Section 230 for any number of actions. When you look at the text of C1, it says publisher, speaker, information. That should be speech. But a lot of these things would not be considered speech if they were coming up outside of the online context, or at least they would be contested. So I think clearly what needs to be limited there is take out the word information and put in speech and make it clear that as an initial threshold matter, a company cannot invoke Section 230's protections unless we're talking about speech, and it's the obligation of the company itself to actually show that it is in fact speech that they are talking about. And the other is that there needs to be a limitation on this kind of immunity if it's going to be given at all under C1. It's got to be limited to those kinds of social media companies and platforms that are not soliciting, encouraging, profiting from, or being deliberately indifferent to what they know is harmful content.
Okay, thank you for that. I think it's very helpful, and again, I appreciated your recommendations. I want to turn now to Professor Leary because I appreciate in your testimony and discussion that because of Section 230, we really haven't developed the case law as envisioned. And so I guess I'm wondering, as part of this process, what you think that we could try to do, or what you suggest we might try to do to fill that gap and address kind of the gap in the 30 years of case law as a part of what we're doing here.
I think a key part of the gap is to get rid of immunity that says we're not having the lawsuit. You can't come in, you can't prove your case, we don't have to give discovery over to you, and the public cannot learn and get answers to some of these questions that this committee is struggling with. It's a defense. And we go into court, and sometimes plaintiffs will be able to prove their case, and sometimes they won't. But that jurisprudence will come up, and currently, we have information about these websites almost entirely from either a 2-year investigation of Backpage from over on the Senate side, or from the whistleblowers that have come forward, not from litigation. And typically we have them from litigation. That's where we learn about product design, about what's happening in these algorithms, et cetera. So I think that that's a key space where we could develop that jurisprudence.
Okay, thanks. And I have about 40 seconds left. I also wanted to follow up with Professor Stenger. You just mentioned in your opening that you had some thoughts on national security. So do you want to share more with the 30 seconds? You piqued my interest. I've got about 30 seconds for you to share your thoughts on that. Some of them.
Sure. Just in summary, I think some of our enemies are very much interested in subverting our infrastructure and also influencing public opinion in the United States by working through and exploiting Section 230 and limited content moderation. So that's something that I think we need to stop.
Okay, perfect timing. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. The